Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the West Yorkshire Football Show and our Bradford City special, focusing on all things Bantams. Tonight, joining me as ever is our esteemed Bradford City correspondent, Gareth Walker. How are you, mate? You all right?
Yeah, good, mate. You?
Yes, very well. And delighted to say joining us as well is Jamie Raynor, the BBC Radio Leeds journalist and the voice of Bradford City for the last 5 years. Thanks for joining us, Jamie. How are you?
Pleasure. Yeah, very well. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. We decided that it was probably your turn after having Popey on and Catherine Hanna as well. So we thought, you know what, it's your short straw to be drawn next.
Well, I think the amount of times that you guys come on our show, we probably owe you one, to be fair. So, no, it's a pleasure to be on.
Obviously, as we touched on, you've been kind of the voice of Bradford for 5 years. Obviously, focusing on this season and actually going out to last season's start with for Graham Alexander. Obviously, he took over roughly 10 months or so ago. Yeah. Just to start with, how would you kind of assess his tenure so far when you reflect on last season as well as kind of going into this one?
Yeah, I think it's been a really productive 10 months or so under Graham as Bradford City manager. I think he inherited a situation that saw the season at one point spiralling into complete failure. And actually, both he and Chris Licchetti turned the ship, had a brilliant run before Christmas, then lost their way in the new year. Then they regained some form. And then there was that awful run that led into March where the season was nearly done. And then they had such a strong finish to the season. And I think they've instilled quite a lot of belief within the group, within the club, that this season could be successful. And I stress could. So I think all in all, it's been a productive time for him. And I think we're going to really see now, given that they've had the full pre-season and a summer window to recruit what Graham needs, we'll start to see the true Bradford City under Graham Alexander.
Yeah, it's going into this season, we started quite well, didn't we? Sort of 2 wins, a draw and a defeat in the league. Obviously, it should be 3 wins. We all saw what happened against Salford. What do you think the club will be feeling about the start of the season? Do you think they'll be happy, or do you think they're hoping for a bit better? We've obviously had the 2 penalty shootout defeats as well.
Yeah. I think if you were to rate it out of 10, you'd probably give it a 6.5/7. And it could quite easily be an 8 if that, as you say, goal had been seen against Salford. And we were talking about a victory and 2 more points to the one that they had to settle for. Look, the Grimsby result was poor. That's probably the one poor performance that we've seen from them so far. They just weren't at it at all. The midfield battle was lost. Grimsby, I hate to say it, looked like they wanted it more. You know, they were first of the 50-50s, and as we know at Blundell Park, it can be quite a hostile environment if the home team can get on top. And that's the first big concern for me this season, is how well Bradford City deal with that hostility and how they deal with the setback. Look, they put in a good performance against Newcastle midweek. Graham Alexander was fuming. He was absolutely livid for the nature in which they conceded those 2 goals, certainly the second one. So there's definitely some creases that need ironing out. But all in all, it's been a steady and I'd say a decent start. Definitely room for improvement, but no reason to be massively concerned.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think the Grimsby result was a little bit alarming because of the way we got beat, wasn't it? It wasn't as though...
Yeah.
I just felt we weren't at it. And I think Graham said that after the game in his interview, didn't he? That we just really weren't at it, and we seemed to lose the battles. And whereas if you're beaten sort of for quality or a bit of a great finish or whatever, but it was a little bit disappointing. And from a fan's point of view, I think we've got to avoid these winning and losing runs that we've been on before, and we've just got to hope that we can bounce back against Carlisle. What did you make of Newcastle? You think we played well against Newcastle, didn't we, Jamie? Just get the 2 goals that we gave away being a little bit poor, really.
Yeah,
and I saw your interview obviously with Graham as well, and he was livid, wasn't he? You could see in his face on the interview that you put on.
I haven't seen him that angry actually. Probably since it was, funnily enough, it was a Colchester 1-1 at the turn of the new year when City were 1-0 up away at Colchester, and then it ended 1-1, and it was similar circumstances. They were in a winning position, and in his words, thrown 2 points away, and it was quite similar on Tuesday. And I think the context behind that as well is that he will have wanted a win on the back of that defeat against Grimsby, no matter who the opposition were, and the nature in which they look, let's just say it as it is. Lewis Richards has dived in. He didn't need to do it. He did not need to do it and give that free kick away. But there was free kicks that led up to that point as well. And it's those fine details that Graham is still trying to iron out of this team. That concentration, that focus. And I thought actually his reaction to the Tuesday night 2-2 against Newcastle in a competition that nobody really cares about in the group stage. Let's be honest. I don't think Mark Hughes even understood what the concept of it was. It gives you an insight into actually how much he's driving standards in this team, that whoever the opposition are, that is not good enough. And you will know if that is not good enough. I actually thought that was quite a refreshing change and a refreshing shift in mindset. It gives you a real insight into what he's trying to build at the moment. But look, they played well. They created opportunities. They should have scored more than the 2 that they did. The promising thing was, from my perspective, is that he made 8 changes and it was still quite a strong side. And let's not overlook the fact that, yes, you might say it was Newcastle's under-21s, but we had Neil Redfern on commentary, and no one better placed for that youth development in terms of coaching, because that's been the priority of his coaching career. And he said, look, these are second-year professionals now. These are second-year academy players. They're not your 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds. They were 19, a lot of them, and there's a reason why they're at Newcastle's academy. They're good players. So I thought they were a good test, and they were one of the better under-21s teams that I've seen play at Valley Parade. Right,
and I thought as well, I don't know what you thought, Jimmy. Ollie Sanderson's looked really good, hasn't he, since he came into the team? The second goal that he got on Tuesday, I thought was harshly disallowed. The first one's really good finish. He impressed when he came on at Grimsby. Would you agree with that? Do you think he'll be someone that could kick on for us this season?
Yeah, certainly. And I actually think the whole Jake Young saga is somewhat diffused by the presence of Ollie Sanderson. Look, it's early days, but in effect, he's got 3 goals in a Bradford City shirt, 2 on record. But I agree with you guys, that header should have stood. And he's just got that classic centre-forward play. And if you look at who else is at Bradford City, Vidane Oliver, not quite as similar, but Tyler Smith and Callum Kavanagh, who will be direct competition for Ollie Sanderson, because Andy Cook's not going to get uprooted from the league team. He is definitely the front runner. The ball sticks when it's passed to him. He can drive with it. He's got a good finish. He's not afraid to shoot. He can clearly head the ball, as we've seen now. Again, early days. He's still young, but that could be quite a shrewd loan signing. And look, Birmingham City really, really benefited from a Fulham striker. And Bradford City might do the same, albeit down the levels, because there's a reason why Fulham got him on a new deal and then loaned him out. They clearly value him.
What you mentioned him briefly there, Jake Young. What do you think went wrong with Jake at City? Obviously, from what I could gather, in January, Graham was fighting quite hard to bring him back and integrate him back into the team. He got the impression he really wanted him, and then obviously he had that injury, and then it's the summer. The summer's come, and he's just kind of with the drama around him again, and he's ended up leaving the club. Why do you think it hasn't worked out for Jake at City? He's ended up moving on.
I don't think we got that long, lads, have we? For this question.
Goodness me, if I had £1 for every time I've said the word or the phrase Jake Young, I certainly wouldn't be working in radio anymore. Jake Young, really disappointing that hasn't worked out, in my opinion. Definitely a talented footballer. I think many people inside the 4 walls of Bradford City would be the first to say that they're very disappointed that didn't work out. Clearly, when he was brought in on a 3-year deal with the option of a further 4th, that screams someone who they see as a long-term player for the football club. 2 years into that, and we've spoken about him so much, yet he's only scored 4 goals for the football club, 2 in the league. It is a saga, and it has gone on for so long. Why didn't it work out? Well, only Mark Hughes can truly answer that first up, as to why that just fell down. We didn't see him in the league when he was subbed off at half-time against Tranmere. He made a fleeting performance against Burton in the EFL Trophy 4-0 defeat, and then didn't play for Mark Hughes again. I completely understand why Graham wanted to bring him in. He hadn't actually spent that much time with him, but when you've come into a football club, one of your players is another League Two side scoring loads of goals, you're obviously going to say, hang on, why is he not playing for me? Why is he not scoring goals? Then he gets the injury, and look, that is a real sucker punch for the football club. They have turned down offers, significant offers that they could have cashed in on, and they've said, do you know what, Graham, we're going to back you. We're going to keep him. You play him against Swindon. That ends all this for the season, and hopefully we'll get the same that Swindon got in the first half of the campaign. The injuries are killer, and it's not the first time that's happened at Bradford City. So many injuries to key players. And then, look, I think, why hasn't it worked out this summer? Well, we all talk about it in the media. There'll be agent talk. We're talking about a 22-year-old footballer. Let's not forget, he's still young. And when there's people saying, well, he's 23 now, but at the time he was 22, you can play League One. Look at this. You can do this. You can earn this money. You can earn that money. It's going to affect a player. And, you know, I always appreciate Graham's honesty. And he was first to say, is he distracted? Yeah, I think he is.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to, I imagine, build a conducive culture, a culture that sees every player in your squad 100% committed to the cause, if that starts to wane, which in the case of Jake Young, it may have done, then the easiest thing to do is to let bygones be bygones and say, this just didn't really work out. He's on his way. He's playing League One football. City have got a fee for him. Might not be as much as what they were going to get in January, but it's all sorted now. And I think if he'd have stayed, it would have been difficult. And I think it was the right thing for all parties that Jake Young left. It's a shame, as I say, a lot of promise, a lot of potential, but I can see why Stevenage wanted him. Dan Kemp's there, his old Swindon teammate and assist maker. And so sometimes that's just football.
Someone else who left in January, Jamie, Alex Gilead, someone who, like, City fans, you don't use the word legend because he's not a legend, but he's a fan's favourite. He's someone that's been there through the tough times and always put a shift in for City. I know that we signed quite a lot of attacking midfielders over the summer window, and obviously Adams has come in from he was on loan at Morecambe now as well as another attacking midfielder, but Gilly could play a few different positions. But then I think fans were a little bit shocked that he was left out of the squad completely at the start of the season. What do you think Graham's thinking was behind letting Gilly go?
Yeah, Alex Gilead is the one that's really surprised me this window, because Graham's mantra is hardworking, fitness, being aggressive in the press and, fully being committed standards-wise, commitment-wise, the way that you train, all of that. And those are real hearty standards for Graham. And Alex Gilead, in his own words, epitomises everything that should be a Bradford City player when he gave him the captain's armband in the EFL trophy last season. So I was really surprised by it. On the face of it, I was surprised. But then we have to put our sentiment to one side and the fact that he's played 205 times for the football club and maybe be slightly ruthless and brutal about the situation. His end product for an 8 simply wasn't good enough. A winger that was made into a central midfielder who never really found a position. And if you're thinking about the amount of 8s now that are at Bradford City, and you named a few there, guys, Alex Gilead isn't going to get in front of those. The position for me that I could see him playing potentially is that of cover for Richie Smallwood, or indeed, if they're a left wing back or a right wing back down, he's that squad player, that versatile player. So, look, there's arguments for both sides of it. I was surprised, if I'm honest, because, as I say, he had all those values that I know Graham looks at. But if we're being ruthless about his end product and what he actually brought to the team in terms of goals and assists, it wasn't quite there. But if you're asking what I would have done, I would have certainly seen a place for him in the squad. Not maybe playing as much as he was last season, but certainly as that squad player that can do you a job and fill in here and there when needed. Yeah,
he's someone that the fans have sort of clung on to a little bit, like you say, because of his effort. And I know Graham mentioned, didn't he, at one point last season about his manager's dream. He's someone who puts a real shift in. And you mentioned there about the fitness as well. That was a big focus of pre-season, wasn't it? I know they obviously went off to Austria. And do you think we'll notice a big difference in them not lagging a little bit towards the end of games this season?
I certainly hope so. Yeah, I certainly hope so. And I certainly hope that we'll start to see a better injury record or lack of injury moving forward as well. For me, that's one of the best bits of work that Graham and Chris have done over the pre-season, is getting the fitness to where it needs to be. And look, we're talking about a player in Graham Alexander who played over 1,000 games. He's not better placed in terms of knowing how to look after yourself and being fit and ready to the standard that you need to be to play. I thought that was the most impressive thing about the pre-season, above all else, recruitment, everything combined. I thought the way in which they have pushed the players, and look, we'll only see it, as you say, later down the line, but it was clear that certainly under Hughes, the fitness wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I think the standards had definitely slipped. And I think post Carlisle, standards certainly slipped. And that culminated in Hughes fundamentally losing his way with the team. And it's difficult for a manager, isn't it, when they've come partway through a season to try and make those wholesale changes when you've still got a game Saturday, then maybe Tuesday, then a week, and then Saturday again. Whereas pre-season allowed for this amount of time to make those changes, and they'll have to settle in. They won't work straight away, but they've revamped the backroom staff. There's a new physio. There's a new head of sports science. They've clearly seen that as an area that can be improved. We talk about 1%, 2%. If those can make a difference, if we can see Alex Patterson for the full season, if we could have avoided Jake Young and his injury, if Tyreek Wright hadn't picked up a niggle 60 minutes into his second debut that saw him out for a month, if Jamie Walker, who was meant to be out for a month, was then out for 3 months, if you can avoid those things and limit them and police them better. Aidan Baldwin's had a scan, not as bad as first feared, 3 to 4 weeks, still a setback, still a frustration, but at least it's not 3 months, and he's having hamstring surgery and making that injury even worse than it could have been. So, I think what they've done is the right thing. We'll definitely know that later down the line. The proof will be in the pudding, but certainly changes needed to be made to the backroom staff and, of course, the fitness, and that's been a big headline for them over pre-season.
How much of a shock then was the fitness under Hughes? Because you would think, former Premier League manager that's worked at all these big clubs with obviously sports science and all the facilities. How much of a surprise is it then actually Hughes' fitness standards just weren't, what you would expect for League Two by comparison? Because surely he's the one that's used to top level fitness.
We've answered the question in many ways, because you're absolutely right to mention that he's only ever managed in the Premier League. And with that comes resource. With that comes countless coaches, countless facilities, countless resource to surround him. League Two, you've got to put the cones out. You've got to go and put the nets up. You've got to muck in and do it all. How many staff do Bradford City have in comparison to Stoke, to QPR, to Manchester City? It's minuscule in comparison. And that was always the fear with Hughes coming down to League Two, is that transition of going into the unknown. And look, let's not overlook the fact that Mark Hughes got Bradford City to the playoffs. No doubt about that. No doubt about that. But the budget was very good that year in comparison to what else was in League Two. And if we're being brutal, if we're being completely honest, it was a budget that should have seen them into the top three. So even then, did they underperform? And I think when you're so used to the top level and you've had all that resource, it is a difference. It is a massive difference. So you're right to mention absolutely that should be his bread and butter. But there's not the same amount of resource. And that's why, I hark back to the standards that Graham and Chris are instilling, because they know that level, because they've played that level, and they know how you have to be. And the fact that you have to muck in and what it takes to be a footballer that plays 50 games. We talk about Premier League, and don't get me wrong, they are talented players. But, League Two players have to play EFL Trophy, League Two, League Cup if they get a good run, FA Cup as well. And 38 league games in comparison to 46. There is a difference. So that longevity and knowing how to manage players so they can last for as much of a 50-game season as they can is definitely a skill, and one that most lower league managers are exposed to more so than your Premier League top flight managers, certainly of a certain generation.
Can we talk style of play now, Gaz? This is my main reason for coming, Gaz, is to talk about the style of play.
Well, I'm happy with the style of play. It's other City fans
that
weren't happy with Hughes, and then the same ones are now saying they're not happy with Alexander.
And look, from a neutral perspective, here lies an issue that, I've lived in Skipton for near enough Skipton and Bradford for 20 odd years. And as long as I can remember, there are always, and we've talked about this on the pod many times, Gaz, there's sections of fan bases that are not happy with the style. And it doesn't seem to matter what that style is, as we've said, with Mark Hughes and the possession base going to something more direct and more in your face now. How does any coach at Bradford City win over the fan base when it comes to the style of play? Because I remember going back to McCall the first time around and Peter Jackson and those days. It doesn't seem to matter who's in charge. It's the same argument from separate sets of fans over the same issues. So the question, Jamie, I guess in short, is how does anybody win? How does somebody unite the fan base?
I think the easy answer to that is no one really cares what the style of play is if whoever is in charge gets Bradford City out of League Two. Full stop.
Yeah.
And Hughes was the best exponent of that because, as I go back to the previous point, Hughes got them to the playoffs, and we shouldn't overlook that fact. But, and Gaz will attest to this as well, the amount of times, particularly at Valley Parade, where it was either 1-1 or City were trailing, and they'd be passing it across the defensive line from left to right on the halfway line, inside their own half, allowing the opposition to get into the low block that they need to in front of the cop when they're chasing a game. That gets frustrating. That gets pedestrian, and fans want to see attacking football, and that is completely understandable. There are ways in which you can win a game of football, no doubt about that. But I think, look, you'll be better placed to talk about this than me because it exists outside of my time covering the football club. But the closest I've heard to Bradford City playing a style that resonates with the fan base is that of Phil Parkinson. And obviously, we know how successful that period for the football club was, not only promotion, but the great League Cup run and the FA Cup beating of Chelsea. Those famous moments came under Parky's stewardship. And I think Graham Alexander, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I think Graham Alexander is the closest Bradford City have had to a Parkinson-like figure in terms of what he wants of his players and the style of play. At times, it will be attritional. It won't be the most pleasing to watch, but I've actually been quite impressed with how they've played so far this season in terms of attacking intent. The XG is high. Derek Adams will be happy about that. And but I think I actually think they're playing a style at the moment that is pleasing on the eye. Grimsby aside, I think it is. And the Bromley game was a brilliant game of football, albeit down to 10 men. But I don't get this argument that it was only down to 10 men. You play what's in front of you. And if the defender hadn't put his arm up on the line, it was 1-0 against 11v11. So I think the style of play under Graham right now is sufficient, but we'll only know that until they can do what they've set out to do, which is get promoted.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that you can't have it both ways. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the same people that were complaining about Hughes are now complaining about Alexander's style of play. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Jamie, that it doesn't really matter if you're winning games. Nobody really cares how you're playing if you're winning games and getting 3 points and you're up near the top of the league. When it comes to the style of play, we do seem to have signed a lot of attacking midfielders this summer.
Yeah.
Has that surprised you that we've not gone for cover for Richie Smallwood?
Yeah.
But we seem to be stacked with lots of eights. I mean, I was a big fan of Poynton and Walker in those 2 8 positions last year. I thought they played a huge part in that run that we had at the end of the season. And in a way, I'm surprised that they've been dropped for Sarcevic and Patterson to start the season. I'm a big fan of Jamie Walker, and I think when he's fit, he makes such a big difference to the team. Are you surprised that we've got so many eights, but we've not recruited anyone specifically to cover for Richie? Because Richie will pick up injuries and suspensions playing in that position.
I'm not so surprised about the eights, but definitely surprised about the lack of cover or perceived cover for Richie. But it's actually been a big talking point that we've had on the match coverage as to why that is. And it was a question that we asked, or I asked Graham a few weeks ago, and his answer to that was that he felt that they had enough in the squad to cover Richie. We saw it slightly towards the back end of the Newcastle game, only for the last 10 or so minutes, where Clark Adwar dropped into that 6 role that Smallwood has played. I've been informed that they've had a couple of bounce games behind closed doors, and Clark has played in that 6 role. And I think for one of those games, he was apparently the best player on the pitch.
Right.
I take the fact that it's a bounce game, but it was something that Andy Kiwami said, actually, that there's no point trying to get cover for Richie Smallwood because there's not many players out there that can do what Richie Smallwood does. It's a very unique role that Smallwood plays. You could say he just plays as a 6, but the way he plays is a very unique role. It's why managers, or certainly in Graham's case, Graham really, really trusts him, because he almost has a way that it's completely, it doesn't acknowledge so much the emotion of the game or the demand of the game at times, if that makes sense. It's very regiment in the way that he plays it. It's a very set way, and so whoever was to cover him would do it in a completely different fashion. Now he's also said that Alex Patterson can play there if needs be, and his big point, Graham, has always been that, you know, if there's players in the squad, they need to have versatility. Mm-hmm. So I can see the point that they have players in the squad that can cover Smallwood, but you wouldn't call them a natural replacement. And that was probably one area that I still felt when the window shut, that was like, okay, I'm surprised that they didn't get a little bit of cover there.
Yeah, I mean, from a City fan's perspective, I often say about Richie Smallwood, people give him stick, but it's an easy thing to say, but I think he'd get a lot less stick if he wasn't taking set pieces. If you watch his game, where he breaks up play and what he's done for his whole career, that position of the six, that he's sort of not the destroyer, but the defensive midfielder. Yeah. You actually watch him; he's very, very good, isn't he?
Yeah. He is. It's a very difficult. It's such a conundrum, is Richie Smallwood. He is playing a lot better under Graham Alexander than he was under Mark Hughes, purely because Graham has had him before. He had him at Scunthorpe on loan. He knows him, and he's playing him in a position that is attuned to his strengths. Whereas Hughes, and this was a point that was actually made on the Width of a Post podcast, which I thought was a really, really good point, that Hughes almost tried to play Smallwood as the Elliot Watt that never was.
Yes.
And they tried to keep Watt and he didn't stay. So Smallwood was the Elliot Watt answer. But Smallwood isn't Elliot Watt. Smallwood doesn't have the passing range that Elliot Watt has. He maybe doesn't have that same vision. What Richie Smallwood is so good at, as you've said, is almost being that enforcer. He'll put the challenge in. He'll be the link between the defensive line and the midfield line, or the defensive line and the attacking line. He's more than happy to play that pass. And then you watch him actually, when he's played that ball, he doesn't bomb forward. He'll just stay. He's almost like that pivot, and they can go from left to right, in and out of him. But he is like Marmite. Let's all be honest. You know, he does definitely split opinion, because, you know, against Bromley, he was absolutely fantastic. Against Grimsby, in my opinion, he was overrun in midfield, as were others. I'm not singling out Richie Smallwood. It was a collective effort, but that midfield battle for me was lost to Grimsby. And that was where I felt he struggled, because there were legs that was, you know, they're striding past him. And so it was a very interesting, quick juxtaposition between why Smallwood is so good and also why many feel that Smallwood isn't the right fit. I agree with you about the corner situation, or the set piece situation. Yeah. But I also think that gives you another insight into the mindset of Richie Smallwood, in that despite what's been said about him, despite the fact that when he places the ball on the penalty spot and the cop boos him, well, I mean, I must admit I was quite surprised by that. But he has the ability to just focus on the job in hand and not be swayed by what is being said about him. He will be fully aware of the criticism that's come his way. He will be fully aware of how the fans, or some fans, I should say, some fans feel about him. And I think fan opinion has turned, let's be fair. I don't think it's as bad as what it was maybe a year or so ago. But he will be well aware of that. Yet he stuck to the task. And that's why I think Graham, above all else, really values him, because he has that ability to not be swayed by the emotion within the stands. He has that ability to stick to the task. Even when City are chasing for a winner against Salford and he decides to pass back in the last moment, is that Richie Smallwood saying, I would rather not lose than win? How many times have we seen City done on the counter when they've pushed for a winner and then they've been done and Salford could have gone and got? I don't know. I can't answer that. But I'm trying to work out the value in it. But I think Smallwood definitely has a place in this City team.
Arguably fair to say, I would say at the moment, I don't know what you think, Jimmy, but possibly our most important player now, because Graham trusts him so much, because he's the captain, because there's no cover for him. Or we know there is flexible players in the squad, but no direct cover for him. It's fair. I think he is, isn't he? Someone who we did get cover for in the window was Callum Johnson. We've signed Jay Ben. Do you think the club are starting to worry a little bit about Johnson's fitness? And is that sort of played out by the fact we've signed another right back to cover for Brad Halliday?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely spot on. I think Jay Ben coming in is probably a signal to suggest that they are a bit concerned about the fitness of Callum Johnson. I don't think it's a surprise because they only signed him on a 1-year deal. I think it's very clear with that length of deal that this was a case of, right, Callum, we're going to give you a chance because we know you're a good footballer when fit, but we're also mindful of the fact that you've got a checkered fitness record. And, speak to any Mansfield fan, they'd have had him in this League One team if it wasn't for that injury record and the fact that he really struggled to get consistent game time at Field Mill. But yes, I think Jay Ben's arrival is definitely an illustration of that concern or need for cover because of Johnson's fitness. I'm really disappointed about Johnson because actually I thought it was from an ability standpoint, he's a very canny player because he's got that versatility that can play right centre half or can play in the Halliday role of right wing back. So look, let's just hope that this isn't too long. Let's hope that he is back on the field soon enough. But no, I think you're right when you say that the cover in the form of Jay Ben is probably an insight into the fact that Johnson, there is a bit of concern about him.
Yeah, I mean,
player as well as Jay Ben.
I was going to ask you about him because you're a Lincoln fan, aren't you, Chris? And obviously he's come from Lincoln. Can you tell us anything about him?
To be fair, from a Lincoln perspective, we didn't see too much of him. He's one of those that was signed and then kind of loaned out. I think he's been at Bohemians from us. Yeah. He's obviously Solihull last season. I think he started 26 and made 29 appearances in total last season. He looks to be a solid player. I think at one point he was certainly going to be cover at right wing back, and then we ended up signing Tendai Darikwa, and then we got Tom Hamer over the line from Burton Albion, which kind of knocked him down the pecking order again. So I think if in the likelihood that Johnson does have a bit of a stop-start season with injuries, I think having him as a solid backup option to Halliday is a fair move. But I'll be honest, I wouldn't be surprised to see him pushing. I really wouldn't be surprised to see him pushing Halliday all the way. I know he was player of the season last season, but he's got a damn good motor as Jay Ben.
It's a really good point, actually. Sorry, very quickly.
No, it's fine. Go, Jimmy.
You do. When Jay Ben came on, he looked lively, and he obviously got the assist against Newcastle for Andy Cook's goal. Great ball in as well. Really good delivery. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's not a given that Brad Halliday is a starter in this Bradford City team. Look, completely acknowledge the fact that he was Mr. Consistent last season, and rightly so was named in the League Two Team of the Season and picked up all the Player of the Year awards. But it was a slightly underwhelming season last season, if truth be told. And it says a lot, with the greatest respect to Brad Halliday. It says a lot if the right wing back, the right back is the shining player in that team, because he was just so consistent. He was the most consistent player out of any player in that Bradford City squad. But it will definitely push Halliday now that Ben has the quality in the final third, the delivery. And we talk about canny signings. I think that's another bit of canny business, just to get him in on loan so that Halliday doesn't get comfortable. And look, Halliday is a brilliant professional. There's a reason why he's called Mr. Consistent, because he is one of those standard drivers that we've spoken about. But I think to have someone hot on his heels might do him a bit of good to push him. But I'm excited by Jay Ben. I thought in the 20 so minutes that we saw of him, he looked quite handy.
Any side pushing promotion needs strength in depth as well, guys. So there you go.
He put a great ball in for that goal on Tuesday night. Obviously, Bradford lad, played at Halifax, didn't he? So hopefully he can be a good player for us. I mean, Callum Johnson, I agree with what you said, Jamie. My friend's an Accrington Stanley season ticket holder and said the year that they went up, Callum Johnson was just absolutely unbelievable. He said he was brilliant. Obviously got his move to Portsmouth off the back of that. And I was really hoping he'd be... I've hoped we'd signed him before, actually, in the past. And just a shame that we seem to have signed an injury-prone player at the moment, but hopefully he can overcome that. Do you think that, obviously, David Sharp might have played a role in bringing Callum to the club? We'll have known him from Mansfield. Bradford fans are renowned for being quite sort of. I describe them as bipolar on the pod quite a lot, because we go from one extreme to the other. We go from 100 degrees and everything's we're going up, we're going to win the league, to we're getting relegated, we're terrible, sack everybody involved. Do you think that? I know we've had sort of 10 managers since Rupp came in. We've had, I think it's 7 since Edin left. Permanent managers, that is, not including caretakers. Do you think with David coming in, do you think there might be more a willingness to sort of stick with Graham this season if things get a bit sort of, I don't know, toxic as they were? They were very toxic, obviously, before Mark Hughes left. Do you think we might be more willing to stick with somebody now? I really hope we are, because I'm sick of sacking managers.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point that you make, and my answer to that is yes, because there'll have been some pretty difficult times at Mansfield for Nigel Clough. There's expectation at that football club as well, not as big as it is at Bradford City. That is true, but Nigel Clough has been there since the COVID season, back end of 2020, and there was an expectation then that they should get promoted, and they, as we well know, well funded, well resourced, and that promotion last season has taken time to build over years. And I thought that it was 5-1, wasn't it, at Valley Parade? 5-1. Yeah. I thought that was a really interesting game, and quite a firm illustration of what Mansfield have been able to achieve through longevity of stability. And I can't imagine it's been easy for David Sharp when at Mansfield, when things have not been going their way and they have missed out on the playoffs. They could have quite easily gone in a different direction. But clearly he stuck with Nigel Clough. They had a project and they saw it through. Obviously, David had left in the summer prior to the season that they got promoted last season. But that was a product over years of building. It was something I asked David Sharp when we sat down with him a few months ago, is that it takes time. And look, I don't think that it shouldn't take as long as it has done for Bradford City. But if we're to talk about where they are in their evolution right now under Alexander, I don't think it should take as long as it did for Clough at Mansfield. But I think Sharp understands the value in not being trigger happy, for the want of a better phrase, for assessing the situation, maybe cutting through the emotion. And I look, I completely see why City fans get frustrated. I think if you can't understand that, then you don't know the club and what it's been through well enough. I think it's completely understandable why fans are quick to be angry, because the last since 2017 has just been so difficult, and it's been season after season of promise after promise that just hasn't delivered, and there's a lack of patience, and I absolutely get that. But who else gets that is Graham, and I think that's the big difference for me. You will both know this. Any football fan does not like having the wool pulled over their eyes. They want someone to say what they've seen. Mm-hmm. And Graham has been the first person I've had the pleasure of interviewing properly whilst covering this football club that will say it as it is. It makes my job a damn sight easier, if I'm quite honest. And I think that David coming in values what Graham is doing, and I think there was quite a telling line from the fans forum in the summer, just before the England game, where I think he said something along the lines of, Ryan Sparks had spoken to David at the time of Graham's appointment. David wasn't affiliated with the football club at that moment in time at Bradford City. I think David said then, he is 100% the manager that you should be going for. And it's about we go back to that point about style of play and having a manager that can resonate with the fan base. That's why I think that there will be some longevity. And I think that this club does need stability, because, I'm not saying that Graham will do it, but it feels like the best fit for a long time in terms of his mantra, what he's trying to do. And it does feel for the first time in a long time that there is a period of stability now at the club, with a set plan and structure, with people in place that can deliver. That I could be eating my words in 6 months' time. I'm not getting carried away. I've been doing this job long enough now to know that. But I have to say what I can feel and see right now. and it does feel like round pegs, round holes for the best it's been in a few years. So we'll see. But I do, to answer your question, I do think David Sharp will see that.
It needs something, doesn't it, to kind of just level things out for a little bit, calm. I mean, look, I've mentioned it to you guys before, the Rochdale game, for example, at home under Hughes, when I think Rochdale won it 2-1, but like that night, as soon as, even at 0-0, Valley Parade was getting on the back. Like, it needs, for me, again, looking at outside from neutral, Valley Parade somehow just needs to be a place of unity that it never seems to have been before. It needs an understanding that this is going to take time, and if results and sides are going to come and grind out results, that happens. It doesn't alter the long-term vision, though.
Yeah, for me, the manager that cracks Valley Parade is the one that gets them promoted.
Yeah. But even they can have the poor results where they're beaten 2-1 at home with a scruffy late winner from the away side. Like,
Valley Parade is almost a blessing and a curse in many ways. In that it is this stadium that screams championship expectation. The size of it, the grandeur, the history, and the atmosphere as well. It's incredible, unrivaled. What a place when that ground is bouncing. It is honestly one of the best atmospheres in football for me, anyway. But it can also be at times the Achilles heel, because opposition teams know there's a blueprint. I'm sure it's on sale somewhere for League Two managers. They just pay it £5 and they know, like, okay, this is what you do. And at what time do they say, right, that's when they'll quieten down? Every manager seems to know. You just frustrate the crowd, get them quiet, then that will start to go against the team. It's difficult. It's really difficult, because I go back to that point. I absolutely understand why the fans are impatient for the context over the last 8 or so years. So they're well within their rights to get impatient and frustrated, because they expect the team to win at that level in a stadium of that size with a club the size of Bradford City. The difficulty you have is that you are trying to recruit players that can handle that emotion and expectation and pressure, but also have the ability to compete at League Two level. When you think about those two very, very key components, the market that you're swimming in becomes very, very small, because the players that can deal with that pressure, the players that can deal with that expectation consistently, 9 times out of 10 go on to play in League One or Championship. So it's a very difficult recruitment process, and that's where your due diligence, I imagine, is key. Your character referencing, your log checking of what they've done previously in their careers. It's why Bradford City is so unique at League Two level. It's why any club that is at a level that they shouldn't be at becomes a very unique task, because it is quite complex. And Valley Parade certainly is a complex factor. But if a manager can crack it like Phil Parkinson did, then it can be your best weapon. It can really become a fortress. And so if Graham and Chris and the team can make Bradford City and Valley Parade a fortress, then I think they'll give themselves a really good chance, because there's no doubt the home form has been the difference between City getting up and not in the last few years at League Two level.
Do you think that recruitment? Sorry, Gaz. Do you think just what you were saying about the characters and that sort of thing of the players that are coming in? How big an impact then do you think that's had on the recruitment this summer? In particular, I'm thinking Sarcevic, Neil Byrne coming from a promotion-winning side, another big club in Stockport County, and it actually. Stockport have had similar days. I've been to Stockport County with Guiseley in the National League North when Guiseley have won there, and how hostile it can be at Edgeley Park at times.
Yeah.
Do you think that's been part of the thinking then, actually, with the players that have come in, that there are players that have been there, done it, that have both obviously promotion winners last season in their case, but also players that have had difficult times under big crowds as well?
Yeah, I think it was a question, actually, I asked David Sharp about the recruitment that they've done so far. And at that point, you're right. They brought in Sarcevic, they brought in Byrne. Obviously, Johnson was part of the Mansfield team that got promoted last season. Aidan Baldwin had won promotion with Notts County 2 seasons prior. So they were always they were all players that at the point of which I asked the question had achieved promotion, other than Tyreek Wright, who we knew about anyway, and they just signed him permanently. You said, look, first and foremost, the ability was the reason why we brought those players in. That was the headline, but it is definitely a helping factor that they've achieved that promotion. And I think it was only a couple of weeks ago, Graham said in a press conference that they wanted players to come in that have won something, not only to help themselves dealing with the expectation of playing for the football club, but for the existing players that maybe hadn't won anything in their careers, they can look to and go, wow, okay, there's a player, there's someone who's done it. Maybe I can learn from them, feed off them, be influenced by them. I think the Sarcevic injury right now is a real blow. We talk about the eights and there's so many pairings and combinations that you can go with now because they've got so many options. But Sarcevic is a leader. There's a reason why he's won promotion 6 times in his career. Yeah. I could be wrong on that front, maybe more. But actually, a lot of those promotions, albeit apart from the Fleetwood one that he did with Graham over 10 years ago, have come in the last few years. Your Bolton, your Plymouth, Stockport, of course. So he is a winner. And I think not having him on the field at the moment is definitely a lack of leader, so to speak, because he really is one of those ones. But I think you're right. The recruitment, certainly, I don't think it's a mistake that the players that they've brought in have achieved what they have done in recent time. I think that is a key part as well in recent history.
It's something that obviously Phil Parkinson's teams look back on fondly with, because even though they weren't necessarily all had promotion history, they all had the attitude and they seem to be able to cope with playing at Valley Parade. And it's something that I think Phil Parkinson mentioned after he left the club about signing players that could cope in that kind of atmosphere. And it just feels like Graham's trying to go down a similar route. I know we talked before about how Graham was probably the closest thing we've had to Parkinson since Parkinson. So it's interesting, and I just hope that it turns out the same way. I mean, two more people that I'll be hoping it turns out the same way are Stefan Rupp and Ryan Sparks. And obviously, Stefan wrote his open letter in the summer where he pledged to give support to ensure we're able to compete in the transfer market. I'm just quoting him here, Jamie. To provide us with a greater chance of having a closer fight with teams at the top end of the table next season. In the past, this has not always been the case. Then, on the day that we had the fans forum at Valley Parade, the news broke that he was trying to buy back Valley Parade.
Yeah.
Since about 2 weeks after that, there was the article in the Telegraph and Argos that there was possibly a legal stumbling block that might be holding things up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a twofold question, this one. How much pressure do you feel the ownership and Stefan and Ryan are under this year? And how is there any more news on us buying back Valley Parade that you're aware of?
I'll answer the second one first. No movement or news that I'm aware of. My understanding is of the legal kind of hurdle, if you want to call it that has come around because of the asset of community value request that was put into the council that was accepted, which, not knowing the full extent and ins and outs, so forgive me on this, there is a correct terminology, but I think I'm right in saying that gives the person who put the request in a 6-month exclusivity period, but that can wane down to 6 weeks if they haven't got the funds available to try and buy that asset. Someone will no doubt correct me on that one, because I think that's quite roughshod a way of trying to explain that.
Well done for remembering that, Jim.
Well, law was never my strong point. But and I completely understand why that asset of community value submission went in. There was concern about the future of Valley Parade at the time that was made. Stefan's stance on wanting to try and buy back Valley Parade came after that. So that there wasn't that understanding from the group of people that put that submission into the council. To answer your first question, I think there is pressure. I think there's always pressure, but I think there is definitely pressure on the ownership, on the board, on everyone associated with Bradford City. If I'm truthful, I think there's been no hidden secret that the club's tried to get promoted in the last few seasons, and they've fundamentally they've failed to do so. Yes, they got to the playoffs 2 seasons ago, but they didn't do it. And as I go back to that previous point, patience is wearing thin, and with that comes pressure. I think on Stefan particularly there is, because there are a list of pledges now that are against his name, and that then comes with a point of accountability. People can now measure his success as an owner by the pledges that he has put his name to. And I think it's a very fair question to ask, and I've seen it a lot. When are we going to be competitive then? What does this competitive budget look like in the window? Now, yet to ask that question to Stefan Rupp, and I'm sure he has an answer for it. I'm sure he does. I'm sure that there's more to it than meets the eye. If I'm being fair to Stefan, Bobby Poynton, new and improved deal. Brad Halliday, new and improved deal. They went and bought Tyreek Wright on a permanent, and that will have cost some money. Valley Parade does look better. It does. It needed to look better. There has been some investment put in there. There must have been. So there'll be elements to the recruitment that has made them competitive that might not look like here's Billy Sharp, so to speak. Because I don't think there was the statement signing that I think many fans look at that competitive budget line and go, right then, who are we going to get? Which former championship player are we going to bring down again? Who?
It's a line to kind of coax fans into that mentality almost, though, without him necessarily meaning it to.
Yeah, and it's understandable as well. I mean, look at what Port Vale did. They went and got loads of players, and Doncaster similarly. I think Doncaster have done some really good recruitment, by the way. I think Doncaster are going to be a real force this season. Getting Molyneux to stay. Clifton is a great player from Grimsby. That's a really smart, canny signing. Sharp can score goals. There's also the argument, and we actually said this on our pre-season special, that Stefan might come out and say that the budget's going to be more competitive, and that's a fair line for him to say. Whether that's the case or not, I would love to ask that question. I really would. But there's also a fair argument in Stefan's case to say, well, wasn't the budget already competitive?
Yeah.
Crawley got promoted on a shoestring budget in comparison to those above them, but they just had good recruitment. They went into the lower leagues and they found some really good players. Lolos now playing for Bolton. He was playing National League South football the season prior to the promotion last campaign. So they went out and they found a squad. Carlisle the season before, they weren't funded to the high extent. They just had a really good team, really well drilled and recruited in a way that meant that they had cover for every position and they were drilled in that wing-back formation that fundamentally, sadly, did for City. So is it fair to say that actually the budget is already competitive? It's just how you use it? Is that a fair argument as opposed to actually going, well, let's just keep throwing money at it and hope something works out? Why don't we actually use the budget? And look, the budget is a product of the revenue that the club is creating, and the club is creating good revenue. And there's a lot of criticism that's thrown the way of Ryan, but to Ryan's credit, the budget is as a product of the revenue and commercial entity that he's been able to produce. Yeah. That is a fact. That the record levels of commercial value that the club has been able to bring in through revenue is, I think I'm right in saying that it's a record for them at League Two level, maybe even League One. I could be wrong on that front. And the budget then becomes a product of that revenue that you've created. It's then how you use it. And that's the key. When we talk about the timeline of where that money's created, then used, and then implemented, it's how you use that money. I'm not going to sit here and try and defend Stefan Rupp. There's definitely errors over the last 9 years of his stewardship at Bradford City, however long it's been. But I think there's also a fair argument to say that the budget maybe already is competitive. It's just how you use it. I say this with the utmost respect to Verdane Oliver. He wasn't cheap. He isn't cheap.
No.
And they're not getting a return on that investment at the moment. He may prove me wrong. I hope he does this season. But what is it? 4 goals since he came to the club, and that's in 2 years. And he spent the second half of the last season on loan at a League One club. So it's how you use that money. I think there's probably a fairer argument to look at the use of the budget as opposed to saying, well, you just need more money.
I think that's absolutely fair. And I've tweeted exactly that before, Jeremy, when I've been in arguments on Twitter with people, that it is how you spend the money. It's not always how much there is, it's how much you spend it. Speaking of Verdane Oliver and just leading into Saturday, how do you see Saturday going? Big game for City, Carlisle. Bit of a rivalry being stoked up. The reason I mentioned Verdane is obviously he's had that. Is he fit yet? And how do you see the game folding out for Saturday?
Yeah, I think Verdane is fit. I think he was back in full training back end of last week, but they were cautious with him because of the nature of his injury, with it being a head injury, concussion protocol and whatnot. But I think from a fitness standpoint, he's at a level where he's available for them going into Saturday. I can't wait for Saturday. I really cannot wait. It's going to be a great game. Graham brushed aside any of that rivalry talk when we spoke with him yesterday because it exists outside of his time at the football club. So I completely understand that, but it doesn't for the fans. And there'll be players in that squad, your Cooks, your Walkers, your Smallwoods, your Hallidays, who played at Brunton Park that Saturday, who had to watch the Carlisle fans flood onto the pitch and just see their season fall away in a matter of seconds. That will sit with them. I'm certain of it. These players care. And Andy Cook. If there's a personal thing for Andy Cook, he scores a lot against his former sides. He's still never scored against Carlisle. There'll be no happier man, shall I say, if he does find the back of the net on Saturday. I look. The atmosphere is going to be great, and talk about big moments in seasons. If City can get a win on Saturday, the feel-good factor that will come from that because of the recent history, but also just getting back to winning ways. If they can get a comprehensive win against the team that there is that rivalry there, then it could really lift the fans as well. So I think Saturday could be huge. I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah,
obviously the change of manager there as well puts a bit of a question mark over how Carlisle play. I know you asked Graham about that yesterday. I listened to your press conference. So final one, Jamie, is it as simple as, I was going to say, what constitutes a good season for Bradford City? Is it as simple as getting promoted? Yeah. It can't be anything else. It can't be. In whatever way they do it, whether it's through the playoffs and they win in the final or they do it automatically, a good season for Bradford City at this stage now, into their 6th season at League 2 level, is promotion. It has to be. It was the target when they first came down. That was the message when they got relegated. We'll be back up as soon as possible. Gary Bowyer actually got them into a decent position at one point, but lost his job, and understandably so at the time. But that will never wane, and that will be the real barometer of success for this football club is getting that promotion.
Well, fingers crossed, eh? Fingers crossed. I mean, look, there's a hell of a lot to happen between now and the end of the season, so it's going to be a roller coaster as always. Look, thank you, Jamie, for taking up or for letting us take up an hour of your evening to join us tonight. If you're catching it later on, you can watch it on YouTube. It will be on there. You can leave your comments on there as well. We always like getting feedback on our videos. Big thank you to Jamie Raynor from BBC Radio Leeds for joining us. And Gaz, I'm sure we'll be back on Monday's show with the roundup.
We will, hopefully discussing a City win.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. That would be a sweet weekend for all Bantams fans. From myself, from Gaz, and from Jano, thanks for everyone that's tuned in and watched tonight. You can follow us on social media on Facebook. We've got a new Facebook page, don't ask. So you can search for the West Yorkshire Football Show on there and give us a like. That would be appreciated. And we're on Twitter as well. But from the three of us, thanks for joining us tonight.